Welcome, everyone, to the Visible Architecture interview series. And today, I'm Carol Assad, and today we have a really interesting guest, Amy Lasch. Hi, Amy.
Hi.
She's got a handwriting practice that's so interesting. I studied handwriting when I went to the Hypnosis Motivation Center, and then I had another handwriting guest, and what she does is totally different. It's amazing. So I was going to give you a little bio on her. So Amy Lasch is a certified 30 plus year handwriting expert who studied 8 years directly under the Dean of American Graphologists and founder of the National Society for Graphology, Felix Klein. And she's going to tell us his amazing story. And with this organization, she was a founding member, and with the NSG, founding member, teacher, and author, and Pascal in New York City. Amy was also president of the Graphology and of the National Society for Graphology in 2005 to 2006. And she's currently writing a book that has to do with Gestalt Graphology and historical handreadings. In general, Amy helps people navigate how they can drive their future and make the best choices for their energy pattern. So, Amy, let's get this here. And first of all, why don't you just, for the viewers, describe what Gestalt Graphology is, and then tell us about the founder, Felix Klein.
Okay. Gestalt graphology, as opposed to graphoanalysis would be, say, something, the type of graphology that describes one letter and each letter and how and combines them. But the difference between that and Gestalt graphology is that Gestalt graphology doesn't only take just one letter, but it compares all elements together to become to come to one conclusion and an overall sense of the writing that can show the motivation of the person and why they act the way they do, instead of just picking out individual qualities. For example, they say you can see when someone is standing straight up, that upright, that they're fine. But if somebody's standing and bent over and holding their stomach, you might say, oh, maybe they're hurting, their stomach is hurting. Mm-hmm. So with Gestalt graphology, we can see that what is going on with the handwriting, but we can see the bends and things like that, why they're doing what they're doing, if there's compensations going on. We measure contradictions in Gestalt graphology. There's hundreds and hundreds of images that we can look at once. But to get a sing-song image, an impression that can be expressed in just a couple of sentences, takes knowing the Gestalt of the writer. And to come to the conclusion of what the Gestalt is, we have to do these in-depth evaluations. We can come at a glance at looking at handwriting and be able to get a very clear image just in seconds of looking at a writing. But when we do an in-depth, digging into all the patterns that we see and measuring them and seeing how many times they repeat, that's when we can get a much more clear picture of why the person is doing what they're doing. And, for example, in a handwriting, we can see that someone's affected, let's say by the use of the space on the page or by the slant. We can see that there's a slant, but until we really go into a full in-depth analysis, do we really understand why the slant and where it's coming from. Mm-hmm. So often all these images in the writing are stemming from the first 8 years of the person's life, and they're called formative years when they're a child. And that's Felix's, my professor Felix Klein was based in psychology in graphology. And he spent a lot of time and a lot of effort trying to show us how to see the Gestalt, how to see the personality emerging out of the writing. We were never to be stuck and conclude a profile on somebody by just looking at a few letters. It had to verify itself over and over. In graphology, I think all kinds of graphology, we have to confirm things 5 times over in 5 different ways. So we want to see, which is why we want a lot of writing, is because we want to see how many times that within the letters repeating, we want to see how many times they do these same indicators on one page. And so as the letters repeat, we can start to see emotional changes happen that they're based in emotions. You can have images that are based in intellect and images that are based in emotion. And so when we pull these out and measure them, and at a glance, we can see them all together as an experienced graphologist. It presents, we match these images to psychological typologies. So for example, Sigmond Freud, Alfred Adler, Carl Jung, if you know anything about these psychologists, they have their own typology explanations of personalities and characters. So we learn there.
It's based on psychoanalysis.
Yes, my Gestalt Graphology is based in psychology and the typologies that these psychologists came up with. So we study their typologies and how they explain characters and personalities. And we take their depictions. You know, for example, let's take Freud. Do you want me to just explain that briefly?
Sure. Let's go.
Okay. So there's Sigmund Freud came up with his typologies revolved a lot around the id, the ego, and the superego. I don't know if you're familiar with those sayings, those words, identifiers. And so in graphology, we identify id handwriting, ego handwriting, and superego handwriting. And how we do that is through zones. And so the way my teacher Felix used to explain it, a common explanation was how do I compartmentalize these personality traits, is that when okay, so the ego says I'm hungry, and the ego is the everyday life and somebody going through their everyday life, you know, consciously, unconsciously, but their reality. So the ego is in the zone of the reality, and it says I'm hungry. So the id is the emotional side of the impulsive, emotional, immature, childish part of the personality says, well, I'm hungry. Well, let's go get ice cream and let's eat this and let's do that. Well, oh, I know what we can do. We can go here. We can go there. And then the superego comes down over the id and says, no, you will eat what I tell you what to eat, when, and how. And so there's these 3 major components to personalities. And then in handwriting, we break that into the zones where we look at the lower zone. So let's take the letter F, for example. That hits all 3 zones. It reaches up to the upper zone. It has a middle zone part to the letter, and then a lower zone part to the letter, as opposed to the letter M only reaches the middle zone, where the T goes into the upper zone. So
you're using the middle zone is the line you're writing on, and then the upper zone, and then below the line. Okay.
Right. And that's right. The line is called the baseline, and anything above the baseline and anything below the baseline has a meaning. Below the baseline is all unconscious, the unconscious area. Above the baseline is the conscious area, but in the upper zone, it's the zone of idealistic reasonings, beliefs, and things like that, and dreams and drives and desires. So sometimes religious associations. And so when we place Freud's typology over the handwriting, we can see what was going on in the unconscious mind and the id, what's going on in the everyday, how they perform in their everyday reality lifestyle, and how what superego in the back of their mind affects and drives them in the mix of this whole thing. Who has the most dominant effect in this writing? Is it an id writing? Is it a superego writing? You know, and we can narrow down from there the type of personality and character they have, because it matches, because we are investigating and researching the writer in that zone and how they're performing, operating, letting go or holding on, and things like that. So once we can understand what's going on in each zone, we can direct a person as to the best way to use that energy. If it's too much energy in the id, then we suggest the balance out between the three zones.
So how did Franz Klein come to this?
Felix.
Felix.
Yeah. This has been going on. He studied from people from the 1800s, and Felix was from Vienna, Austria. He came over to the United States in the 1960s and brought what he knew then and started the National Society for Graphology by 1972. There was another scientist, graphologist, his name was Max Pulver. And Max Pulver, he was most popular. I think his studies came out of the 1940s, around there. Before him was Ludwig Klages. And Klages was, say, the turn of the century, 1910, and his, going back, the history of graphology could be very interesting for us to cover sometime, but going all the way back, even into Egyptian times era, they had a respect for writing, and they did interpret images and the way they were executed, so these things have been studied for just century after century. As handwriting changed, and let's say the Gothic period and the alphabet changed, they adapted. But when I study and I look back, I look back what Felix learned from, which was Klages and Max Pulver. Okay. Max Pulver was from Germany, excuse me, and he had very in-depth explanations of every, slant and every reptilian brain impulse. Max Pulver explained, and he explained why, and he was the one that matched a lot of this to graphology. The emotional surge in graphology and how that shows. It's a little bit, too much to go in here because it's so scientific. I would have to, the slant and the size of the writing, and what Max Pulver did was really associate these unconscious and conscious movements in writing to the brain impulses and emotional impulses that springs forth out of someone. So he, let's see, how can I explain this? He, I don't know that I can explain this easily.
But I mean, when they're putting this together, because there's all different kinds of handwriting, different interpretations and ways you go. And so these all have a psychoanalytic point of view. So were they doing analysis with a patient and then doing their handwriting? Is that how he developed, the correlation?
Yes, exactly. They were studying people's writings, but also you study people's writings that are mentally insane, and how they script the space they use on the paper, the pressure they use, the direction they choose to go in, you know, out of the desire, but attraction, where what they're doing is how this really it boils down is the brain and in which part of the brain these impulses come from. So what they did really in the very beginning was to follow what we call follow the stroke. They followed the very primitive minded impulses from somebody. So when you're standing there and you point down, you know that you're saying here and now. When you point behind you, you're inferring the past. When you point forward, you're inferring going forward. So this is primal impulses and messages that any one of us can get. As I sit and explain to you, you can get that instantaneously. So that's what they were following in graphology. Someone who innately knows what forward is, and their mind or their subconscious mind drifts off in the direction of the forward. Now, if you have handwritings from all over the world, some write left to right, but their leftward journey in handwriting still is that's their forward. So you have to go into the mind of what the person wasn't the intention to write, was intended to write left to right, so there's questions that have to be asked of where this, what was their intention in the begin with, but it is, following the intention of the line and what directions it chooses to go in. So when we follow handwriting, we are literally following the pressure of the line, if it connects to the next letter, how long it takes, how many times do they separate from letter to letter, do they have giant spaces between the words, or do they have small spaces between the words and lines? All these things are reflective of their inner impulses and what makes them comfortable or uncomfortable. And people will follow these feelings onto the paper, where some people really don't want to write on the space of the page. They don't want to use the right-hand side of the page, that margin. Or some people write right over the margin, or write practically off the page. So if what is making somebody stop and what's making somebody soar straight through that area, has a lot to do with inhibition, what comes from these very deep primal impulses, where these impulses come from. So when somebody comes and so let's talk about the brain for a second. This is what developed now over time. Klages and Pulver incorporated the brain, but as science grew and into the 60s and 70s, we started learning more about the brain. We started, in my era of graphology, started really going into the brain's effect in handwriting. And as we're learning, they knew that, I don't know how early they knew that there were three separate parts of the brain, but what we know now is that there are three separate parts. There's the reptilian brain, which is like the stem, the core of the brain. Then we have the mammalian brain, which was over time wrapped over the reptilian brain. And then mammalian brain is also connected to animals, and it's the emotional brain. And then we as humans have the different part of the brain that animals don't have, is called the neocortical brain. And that is the top brain that goes over the mammalian brain. So that's the reasoning brain. And so for what we're seeing in these three different brains, we can see in handwriting, we can see reptilian impulses, very early primitive Surges, we can see emotion, the surge of emotion and how that plays in handwriting. And we can also see the intellect and the intelligence and how much the intelligence overrides the emotion and the primal instincts. So we're measuring these three parts of the brain as we're looking, what is, did the brain gain enough control in certain time periods in their formative years, or did they not have enough control, attention, direction in these certain formative years?
So different letters, because I know like when because yesterday, Amy did a fabulous consultation with me. It was so accurate. So thank you. But so each letter corresponds to a part of the brain, reptilian, mammalian.
No, every letter and many different parts, each stroke can express a different part of the brain or all three at once.
Oh, I see. So every letter could be any of those three parts.
Yes, and all of them at the same time. Because let's say, for example, you're writing the letter T and you have the T bar, so the T bar crossing can be more emotional than the stem, and how that was executed on the page can be more of a conscious thinking thing, engaging neocortical brain more so than the emotional brain. I'd say the T-bar crossing is more so engaging the emotional brain, where we have bends. When T-bars stems bend, that may have more to do with the real inner reptilian innate knowledge, so sometimes when we see Felix Klein actually discovered directional pressure, and that's when we see certain strokes bending. Certain strokes should bend and some shouldn't be bending at all. And in momentum, if some bend, that's why we have to check everything 5 times over. How many times did the T-bar bend? How many times the T-bar bends? Well, the page, the right-hand side of the page can verify why the T-bar bends, so this is, all these puzzle pieces need to be put together to sing-song one emerging character to come through that. And so when we see through the directional pressure, that is unconscious. It could be conscious, but it's unconscious to the point because it's a pressure coming from the past. And so that stroke bending has a lot to do with primal feelings of I'm collapsing or I'm feeling pressure, that's, not necessarily emotional because it's physically affecting you in an impulsive way that very deep down, so it gets very, very complicated and intense. So it has to be broken down letter by letter, word by word, stroke by stroke. But it has to, but after we do that, all of these individual indicators repeat the same song, repeat the same. You can see someone's affinity for structure in the way that the slant on the page, the height of the middle zone, the use of the lower zone, the placement on the page, all these things will add up to the same answer. So that's why they all have to be compared together. And that one answer is the gestalt of the essence of what you're looking at. And, you can look at a handwriting and capture the essence of that right away. Because, maybe we could get back to Felix for a minute and describe, because you had asked me earlier who Felix was. Felix studied actually from Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung. Him and his sister, because Felix was from Vienna. He actually spent some time in a concentration camp by the time he was 13. But he was too young to go to college, but him and his sister used to sit in on Freud's lectures and, sneak in the back and grab a seat in the back of the lecture hall.
Mhm.
And him and his sister did this also with Carl Jung, who started the same lecture hall after Freud was there. So they had a great exposure to the personality development, the psychological structuring of how the personality and the character develops and how it plays out once that is, even according to age, and the pulls and the influences and, what makes a personality tick. But, what Freud did also, and what Felix studied a lot, was the processing of emotions. And that's what Freud and Jung all studied within this character structure, was how are these emotions hitting people as they go through life? What are they doing with that emotional interruption in their lives, or the push that it has on them? And what is the possibility of transitioning that emotion? And where does the intellect come in? Well, so having the exposure, Felix, of really dissecting each component of what the brain was doing was, extraordinarily expansive. Especially at the time. This was, I guess it was the 40s before that. And so what happened was Felix was taken to a concentration camp, and they knew that he knew handwriting analysis in his section of the camp. So they wanted to know, the guards wanted to know more about somebody or a writer at hand, and so they would ask Felix if he could evaluate the writing for them, and they'd give him a sandwich. So each time Felix evaluated a writing for them, they'd give him a sandwich, and Felix would take the sandwich back to his area and cut it into 12 pieces and give each to a piece of the 12 people that he was encamped with. And he was a really beautiful, generous soul, and never stopped taking this generosity into everything he did and everybody he met, including bringing it to the United States, this whole science, and creating the National Society for Graphology, having a certain group of founding members to consult with and to have correspondence with, that they could, each and all give feedback and discover new things about handwriting, which they all, and Felix, found a directional pressure in all of their research and their meetings together.
I find it so interesting that he would listen to these lectures, and then he put all of that knowledge into the handwriting. That transfer, because they weren't doing that. I mean, so it's an interesting thing. And I was wondering if he came from if he do handwriting from a different style, a different interpretation. And then he changed to this because of all the psychoanalytic, lectures and all that he was listening to and learning.
Well,
but, yeah.
Somehow he knew graphology at the same time he was crashing the Freud lectures, or he knew some before that, because Max Pulver was also from Germany and in the same area and was around the same time. So who was, we couldn't study Max Pulver for the longest time because we had to have it transcribed out of the German language. And we finally did do that in the 90s. But yeah, Felix, of course, read in German, so he was able to really understand. He signed to Ludwig Klages again, and Crepio-Jamin was another. French, there's a lot of countries that are very involved. England in graphology and Gestalt Graphology. There are Gestalt graphological libraries all over the world. We are in the United States probably one of the more countries lagging in the science of graphology, and we shouldn't, because they are, soaring ahead of us in this field, and they know a lot more about secretive things than we know or even can access, and that's why I'm trying to keep it alive.
Yeah, but I mean, yeah, that it's so big in Europe and all these other countries.
Yes, and that's why Felix had that ability to really get so very educated in so many different ways about this, because they were all around him at the same time. He was exposed in this one country with all these other countries around him. And when I came into graphology, I could, there were constantly people, I was studying in New York City, and there were constantly people who were visiting New York, sitting in with our lectures. So we had this one class, after you did your 4-semester course with Felix, it was 2 years, 4 semesters, then you would enter this thing called the Monday Night Masterclass. And the Monday Night Masterclass started in 1972, and it lasted until, I guess maybe, very infrequently now, but it probably stopped about 2015. So after Felix passed, Roger Rubin carried it on, and I tried to make it every Monday I could. And so I really did catch a lot, but I also caught a lot of these really unbelievable graphologists from all over the world. We had Marie Bernard, who was a cabaret singer from Germany, who was also a graphologist, and she was an entertainer, yet she was really intense with graphology. She used to give lectures. She was great being exposed to her. And so a lot of these people, we had priests who studied graphology, and they'd sit in on the Monday night class every once in a while, and their perspective of their experience and what they learned in life. Everybody's experience comes into them as a graphologist, and where, for example, myself, I have a sister who studies astrology, so I can see and parlay astrological things and in handwriting, universal things, so we all have our own contributions, but we all still, just like doctors, when you go to a doctor anywhere in the country, or the nurse, they all do the same thing. They have the same performance and system that they follow. Same thing in graphology. We're all trained the same way. We follow the same system, and it's all mathematically measured and coordinated. It's a very structured science. It takes a lifetime to learn, really.
It seems like it just would be years. I mean, this is so much to put together.
Yes, and what Felix did was also on Saturdays, we had these lectures that once a month it was on 57th Street. I forget the name. It's a hotel we used to go to, and rent out the conference hall and bring the big screen. And each Saturday, once a month, a different speaker would come in from all over the world, and we would learn their contribution and what they knew and could show us. And it was always a 6-hour day. We stopped for an hour lunch break and went back for the next 3 hours. We were very, very intensified studies. Sometimes we would study artists, and then we'd have a slideshow of all the famous artists, Renoir, Rubens, and Peter Paul Rubens, and all these different artists, that we compare their signatures and their handwriting to the art that they made, and the Gestalt within the art, the purpose behind it.
Yeah.
And how it matched their handwriting and who they were and what they were compensating. Mm-hmm. So what we find in handwriting is there's a lot of compensating going on. And if you don't mind, I would like to maybe discuss the first 8 years of a child's life, because, the developmental years, because that's what we really follow in graphology. When I look at someone's handwriting, I'm looking at what happened to them the first 8 years of their life. And a lot to what was their mother and father encounter, their relations, the way, how did they see their mother and father in that handwriting, but also that picture is a frozen image from before they were 8 years old.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You see what I mean? So what happens is that as I'm going to talk as if you assume that you know some of this, that there's the first 8 years are developmental years, and they go by every 2, 0 to 2, 2 to 4, 4 to 6, 6 to 8.
Right.
And just to be brief, because it's very intense, so many things you can pull from these periods, but what we're looking at a lot of the time is in the 0 to 2 phase is called the oral phase. That's when the baby really only knows its mouth, and life is understood through feeding, and whether feeding happened in a good way or a strained way, these kinds of things. The baby is very aware. And, let's say, for example, that you're a baby and you're hungry, and you're saying in your head, I'm hungry and I want to eat. I want to eat. I'm hungry. How do I get to eat? I'm hungry. I want to eat. So you're rotating this around your head a lot. You're not saying, oh, look at what's on TV. Oh, that was funny. Oh, there's not really a whole lot of things breaking up these thoughts.
Right.
So you're training inside your brain bit while you're that child. Where is my mommy feeding me, and how come she's not here right now? And I'm hungry, I'm hungry, I'm hungry. So they don't know, and they don't have the brain development enough to really reason what's going on. So there's a very emotional, instinctual situation happening there that needs to be remedied and rectified. And to the degree of the sensitivity of the child or what happened in that period, they reflect. If they didn't have enough attention from the mother, the size changes. Next, we go into the, because the child is searching, and so as it's looking for the mother, there's an extension out. If it cries louder, or it's like trying to reach, they only know how to reach through these emotional expressions. So then we get to the 2 to 4 phase. And just to jump back one more thing, what if the child wasn't satisfied during those eating times? It will grow up as an adult, maybe a smoker, maybe have problems with diet, maybe be over shopping. There's compulsive behavioral things that get attached to the oral period. So then we go into the next period is called the control, the anal period, where the child is learning how to use its motor functions. And it still mostly knows the mother. It's maybe getting introduced to the father, but we call the mother the archetype, because really when the child is in the womb, and it's in the squishy place that is, the mother's right next to it, and she's still there, and he can hear the voice. But when it comes out of the womb and the mother is like distant in such a respect, where she was working, or she has 6 children, or she's the only one on the farm working the farm, there's all kinds of reasons why the mother is not available. But that's all the child really knows, that feeling of who that person was. It only knows that one person for a while, until it starts developing in the brain a little bit more. So when 2 years old comes around, they're knowing the motor function. They are adjusted to where the mother is or where the mother isn't, and how much satisfaction that was or wasn't. They are coming to this place, and it could be apathetic at the same time, saying, well, she's not here and nothing's happening, so I'm going to give up and I'm just going to move on over to this block of toys, So as 2 comes around, and the control comes around, the child, if the child was given too much control to have to deal with in those restrictions in that period, the child will grow up thinking that everything needs to be controlled. If it doesn't get enough control in that time period, the child grows up with a lack of steering, of a lack of how to control. So then we go to the between 5 and 6 is called the phallic period, is where the baby now has the motor controls a little bit under more understanding, and now it's got the parents. It understands that there's a mother and a father, and there's interaction between them. And if the child doesn't see a good interaction, if the parents are fighting, or if there's tension in that partnership. The child sitting there, again, not fully brain developed, doesn't know how to deal with this, doesn't have the vocabulary. It has that same very strong emotional base, and it doesn't know how to manage the world to try and stop what's going on. So the child can grow up, if it has that damage in those 2 years, 4 to 6, that they might not be able to handle the world, handle their world, handle what the world is, how it's supposed to be handled. There could be a confusion because we're talking about skewing impulse patterns. The impulse was to just want to eat normally, and it got strained. So now the impulse changed. So same thing with all of them. At 6 to 8, we have the genital period, where now it learns it had already learned the mother, father. Now it goes on to the cousins, the friends, the social aspect, and what kind of maybe damage happened in that social time period could also lead to a neurosis in a social aspect of the person. So by the time they're 8 years old, they now have a brain development where they can reflect back as to what happened. And when they reflect back to their parents or what was young, or, the feelings they felt, it starts showing up in the handwriting, because that feeling now drifts into avoiding the side of the page, not connecting the letters or connecting them just fine. These periods are so impactful that if there's something going through the child, so the child doesn't have a whole lot of vocabulary, and it says, oh my God, I'm getting yelled at again. I have to stop this. I can't play. The toy has to go back immediately. Oh my God, I'm getting in trouble again. So there's these things that repeat over and over in the mind. They don't really know how to remedy, stop, soothe what's going on, that it's too much training. It trains them too hard they've got to get over it in another part of their life. It became an addiction in a way, to respond to these things all the time. So so what happened. So yes, we can see in the developmental years, the 2 to the 4, how much control the handwriting is. The 4 to 6 is their lack of steering, because they don't know how to drive their world, and the social aspect. Are they holding hands, with other friends, being friendly, things like this can, and I don't know why, they don't really have a whole lot of ability to change after those, but after the 8 years, it's very, very solidly cemented into a character. To change it, it would take a conscious intervention of doing visualizations, repeating, something over and over for trigger purposes, to find where so in handwriting, we're identifying what happened in those phases, where it went wrong, so to speak, and what's the compensation that needs to rebalance this picture. So is someone spending too much time? Do they have too much control over their handwriting? Do they have not enough? And what's going on in the lower zone? And this goes back to Freud again, where Freud has another component to his typologies, which is primary process and secondary process. So here the primary process is where there's 8 years development. That's the primary situation that created the character. So this is who they are. As they go and grow and become an adult, they are to learn what happened to them in their past and to process how realistic their reactions are, and keep a stiff upper chin, come on, get a backbone, come on, pull yourself together, so you have to correct yourself when you feel the apathy coming in to not show up for your life again. So what Freud says is that we have a primary process of our original process that these things happen to us. Then we have a secondary process. And when we look in handwriting to see someone's secondary process, we see how well they've adjusted themselves to what their primary process was. We can look in certain zones and see how well that zone is developed, and if there is, well, it really breaks down to bad space. If they're not using the space properly in that zone, that means there's an underdeveloped lack of processing. So they're kind of chaotic in some form in their handwriting. That means that the stroke is shooting over this way, shooting there, you know, digging in, ending in a blunt stroke, you know. These are emotional things. And so if these emotions weren't attended to, you could have a lot of people bury what happened, you know, don't want to remember, or 2 to 4 or 5, you know, very traumatic things happen to people in childhood. Even as simple as the mother just couldn't be there because she was too busy. The father just checked out, you know. So without these, and these are 2 formative pillars in someone's life because it's primal. You know, everybody has parents and everyone has this one and that one, the mother, the father, the male, the female. And when you measure yourself.
Yeah, what I love when you were doing it, how you used the personal pronoun I.
Yes.
To represent the mother and father. That was so interesting.
Oh, I'm glad you found that interesting because
but as you're going through this, and then all of that's encapsulated in that capital I. I mean,
yes, it is. It is. The personal pronoun I incorporates the mother and the father. There is like no separating who that person is because of the influence the mother and the father has. Until they really grow into their secondary conscious processing of who they were, and when you really get into your secondary processing, there is, even then, you can't really shake the mother-father imprint. So what happens in the capital I is that first, you know, when you're taught, and a lot of different countries have different capital I's, but in the United States, we have the Palmer method. It's the school book method where you start the capital I, let's say in the middle, you go trace backwards, you come back around, you go down to the baseline, you swing over to the left, and you cross and you go forward. You're familiar with this typical approach to the capital I, cursive capital I. Well, the first stroke going up and around is the image of the mother. That's because that's the first thing the child did. It learned its mother, and it's retracing the feelings of who it is through the mother image in that part of the letter. As that I comes back down and it's reflecting on the father, a lot of times what we see in the handwriting is that some people have actually crossed out their father. And sometimes they cross out their mother. And if there is an impact in the capital I in the mother area, we can tell right away that there was a glitch in the way that relationship formed. Now, where and how and why, we've got to dig into more in-depth analysis, but the answer will be there. And we look at all the spots on the paper that indicate the mother, and then we go to the father. A lot of times when I don't see the father image in the capital I, in the personal who they are, they're not identifying with the father, or it's just not strong enough of an image for them to care about, then we say, well, where was the father? What kind of impact? Because if your father wasn't involved in your life, let's say the primal thoughts again. Let me give you an example of when, even in fairy tales, and the mother and father picture the image, it's like the father can say symbolically, well, my dear child, grow and go forth. And as you go forth in your life, I will be there. I will support you. I'm behind you. And when you get to the end of your life, I will be there cheering for you, and I will cheer you on, and you come to the end of this and see me there, and you have the confidence because I am believing in you, you know? Well, not every girl has or child has a father that says, I'm there waiting for you at the end of the line and I'm cheering you on. No, that doesn't happen all the time. And you can see that in the handwriting through the image of the father. So a lot of times the child is dropping out because there's not that support from the father in the baseline. The father is the baseline of life, and how you walk forward on that road is an influence of the father. The mother has an influence in the early formative years, where the father takes more influence in the growing and discipline and the, you know, how to handle life and the lessons, you know, there, because, you know, the fathers, you know, the mothers really weren't allowed to be any much more than a mother for thousands and millions of years, where the father had to go out and do the, you know, killing the animals in the woods, and, you know, the hunting and the gathering and the getting the job and being professional and mixing with the boys group of the, you know, the Middle Ages, and how they, you know, there's a brain, ancestral brain, that our ancestral, you know, you could say that about straight razor shaving. A man would really know kind of easily how to straight razor shave because it's in the brain of the man. Only recently did we have razors, you know, so, Gillette, whatever, you know, so there are things, the movement of a sword is imprinted in the man's brain for millions of years, this type of thing. So the ancestral brain is hard to catch and reprogram. So the man has an ancestral brain knowledge, and the woman, the mother, has the ancestral brain. So that's where their roles, you know, are still very effective today, for the mother to watch the child and the father to help the growing, the maturing and adult, whatever, you know. So these things are not so different today as they ever were millions of years ago.
I'm finding it so interesting in these interviews how many people are going back to the whole ancestral thing, you know,
Really?
within the music and the toning and just all these different modalities. It's really,
I'm happy to hear that.
Yeah. But I wanted to bring up one other thing that I found amazing, was that you said that it isn't just the cursive, but that the printed letters, just like you can also analyze those, because a lot of them can only really other handwriting systems only can analyze the cursive.
In Gestalt Graphology, we're not really looking into cursive or printing. What we do is we're following the stroke, the imprint, the strength of the stroke, the direction it's choosing to go in, and the breaks. If a person wants to write cursive and connect all their letters together, they're going to have that impulse to do that, because that impulse comes from a very early place that the mother held the hand, and she was, the child was taken care of and watched over, because this imprint follows the child into the way they're conducting their life now. So for example, let's take the capital I, that's a printed capital I. You have the stroke, the first stroke that goes down, the top of the I is a cross above and the bottom of it is crossed below it. A lot of times and I don't like to give indicators because I don't want people to really compare themselves without really knowing more about what the rest of the handwriting does and says, because you can counter one image with another. Something can come around and contradict that other image. So, but what you can see in that capital I, the printed capital I, is that if the top bar of that capital I is not touching the stem of the capital I, and there's a space between the stem and the top bar, there's a space between the connection of the writer and the mother. Same thing with the father. If there's a space between the father and the stem,
Right.
you know, the crossing of the father and son, then there's a space between the relation, the connection, the emotional connection between the two. So if you didn't have an emotional connection with the mother in those 0 to 2 formative years, and like we were talking, this repeat that goes on in your head, what happens with the child, and depending on the sensitivity of the child, but they say these things over and over in their head. Oh, no one's going to be here for me. I've been calling out and calling out, and now I'm getting apathetic, thinking that no one's going to show up for me anymore. So I'm just going to sit here and you know, curl back into myself and pretend life is something else now, you know. So they reason with themselves to that the fact that this feeding isn't going to come when they want it. They're disappointed. They have to deal with their disappointment, but they also have to remedy it all by themselves without no language or brain, you know, to really justify that and reason it. So what happens is that they take that built-in pattern into their adult life, and you could say someone, you know, that has a problem being late to work or something like that. They could have had this trauma very, very early, 0 to 2, where the mother was unavailable and the apathy set in, you know, where I'm going to have to be, you know, satisfied with my disappointment. Right. And the child goes into adult life where the boyfriend doesn't show up for it, or they don't get the job, or things just keep going wrong, is because they have this imprint from that period in their life saying, you know, you deal with it. It's not going to show up, and you'll figure out how to remedy it to yourself, and you'll be okay because, you know, things never came, and, you know, you did okay anyway. So you justify and you reason out the fact that it didn't happen. It's not going to happen. You know, you become apathetic and easily resign yourself to the fact that it might not come. And then when you resign yourself to that, you have also the law of attraction figuring on in, where it says, well, that person's sending out a message into the world that it doesn't matter if it comes or not. Right. You know, so we have to get real conscious about what really happened to us in those baby times and how we're treating babies now. Where I don't mean to say this, but for, you know, because all mothers are so busy. But if a mother has an option to, you know, that first year, you think the baby's not really thinking things, and it's sleeping, and it's not, you know, it doesn't, you know, have to talk just yet. It is so counter to the reality of what's really going on with the baby, and how it is the most important imprinting possible. So some women say, oh, I have my full-time job now, I'm going to have the baby, and then I can get back to work and my mother can take care of the baby. Not a good plan, you know, because that baby, the mother is the archetype of the feeling, of the vibes, of the energy of what that baby knows. If that baby that's not there, the baby knows it's not there, and it longs for it. It creates a longing. Unfortunately, you know, my one professor in class that we used to study, she used to always say, it's always the mother. Everything always falls back on the mother. It's always, you know, and it's like mothers are so sick of having to be responsible for these really monumental moments in these babies' lives. But it's true. It's what the reality is, that what they're creating, the cycle of anxiety or worry or not worry, is what will follow them the rest of their life, you know. So that longing has to be, you know, they have to be, children are not really at that age especially taught how to remedy themselves, soothe themselves. Children in very early, they need to learn how to soothe themselves, because then they'll get into this adult stage and they won't have any recall of what the mother did to help them out of that feeling.
You know, we're almost at the end. This went so fast. But I want everyone to see your patterns. You know how you make them? Because it's so unique to your Gestalt Graphology.
Yes.
So maybe we could end on this, because it's like amazing. Because as you're talking about these strokes and patterns, you actually make a pattern of the handwriting.
Yes, we follow what the energy does, because if we get an imprint of the energy, we know how someone's conducting their life,
Yeah.
how fluidly, or if they add too many interruptions into their life, if they literally stop their energy in midstream. That is this indicator. So I'm going to hit the share, and let's see if I can get this up. Can you see this?
We can. Success.
All right, good. So what you're looking at are rhythmic imprints, and how we do this is these were already done, so and then copied onto a piece of. But what happens is you see the handwriting on top is let's take the word Italy on this left-hand side of the page. So I want to go to Italy. The left, you see this Italy that's a backwards capital I, where the writer started off on the left, did the father image first, came back around, and then drove that stroke straight into the T. So that is where, actually what we would say is that the mother had more of an influence than the father, that in that writer. So what happens is we go to that where the I started, and then where the Y, the last stroke of the Y that comes up to the middle zone. Once it goes down to the lower zone, it comes back up to the middle zone, and we draw a line from where the writer started the pencil, and they didn't pick it up until the end of that Y. And then we look down under the signature on the right-hand side where the imprint is, and we can see on that top section where the line goes straight, because that's what the imprint did. It went from the I to the Y, so we draw a straight line there, and that's the rhythm imprint of that one word, and that's a pretty fluid and straightforward. So you see that the person always where they put the pen down, where they pick the pencil up, it is consistent to drawing straight lines. Now you go to the right-hand side of the page and see this person's imprint pattern. You can see that the part that you can capture that before it gets cut off is that it's pretty fluid looking too. It looks like this person is writing from putting the line down straight till it picks it up, but the space between the lines, and they're on the bottom of that imprint pattern, it starts to get chaotic. So it starts out okay, and then as time goes on, it gets more condensed and more well reduced, so and sporadic. So it's hard to tell. You might not see that just looking at the handwriting.
No,
so
that's why I thought these are so visual. It's amazing. And there's 4 different ones. Each one, they just look totally different.
Yes.
They're so unique.
Exactly. So I would do this with each writing because, did I do that right?
That's fine. Good. Because we have, it's been an hour, so we've got to wrap it up.
Okay, I know.
But really fast. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't, but this one went really fast. Yeah.
Good. We give recommendations. We try to help people how to balance out their energy. And when you can see something in your handwriting, you say, I have a tendency to, I don't want to say things because I don't, specific identifiers, but if I have a tendency to cross my T-bars high up or cross my T-bars low down, I have to understand within myself that I have that tendency to cross my T-bars low. And whatever that means, you say, you find out what that means in your handwriting, and you say, you apply it to your life, well, I know maybe I might be using more energy than I have, and I have to really, be careful of how much energy I think that I have, so there's a lot of, there's medical things that can be seen. It's hard to,
there's so much information for such but
to try and narrow down how
we could have another one on the history. It would be really amazing.
Oh, sure. I could put that. You would like that.
Because you're writing a book that
I am, yes. But the book I'm writing actually was a departure because I found a Revolutionary War spy in my hometown, and no one would believe that he was real. So, except we had the handwriting. So I took the
Oh,
handwriting to my professor in New York, Felix, in the
uh-huh.
Monday night master class, and we evaluated it and confirmed that it was an authentic handwriting. Just because it was a copy on a copy sheet doesn't mean that it wasn't real. So we
Right.
found it was real. And so what I decided to do to prove to the town that it is real is to go to these handwritings that are from the war that they didn't believe was real and to evaluate them to show how the original soldiers personality character emitted out of that handwriting, who they were. This one spy that I found was an actual spy, and you can actually see in that handwriting
Uh-huh.
his tendency towards research, investigation, reaching, but also staying with something for a long period of time. You know, it's fascinating to see how someone does something that that's what most people choose what's good for them, you
Right.
know, but and their pathway in life, but they don't but they do that in a physical and intellectual satisfaction for themselves, but never really addressing the emotional. So you know, a lot of times, yes, you found the great career for yourself, but you never really addressed the emotional situation that drove you to that career, you know.
Right.
So we're trying to address the emotion.
Okay. So when this is posted, it'll have all the ways they can reach you, and
Yes.
it'll all be posted online for that.
Yes, and also I will have a YouTube channel that link
Mhm.
that I'll post other handwritings and other videos that I will explain Anne Pascal's ruler and how her rulers, you know, measure and things like that. So you'll get
That's
more
great.
information that way.
Yeah. Okay. Well, this was great. There was so
Good.
much information. It was wonderful. Okay. So
Uh,
thank you.
I'd love
And we
to
look
cover
forward to
something
part
else.
two.
Yes, in part two, let's take this on some more.
Okay. So goodbye, everybody.